行，那就放吧。
你准备好就可以点了，应该
好
那边应该准备好。
一起玩。
Yeah. Okay. 好，let me speak Mandarin for now. 大家下午好，我是沙龙。每一个周日的下午，我们会搞一个茶会，有一个主题的讨论。这个礼拜比较特别。Now I'm gonna speak in English, and this afternoon is kind of special because what? Because I spending a lot of time at the tea house to run the business, and I have this opportunity of engaging few interesting second generation Christian in Chicago, Chinese, and we started to talk about how they grew up here and the advantage, disadvantage, pleasant and unpleasant experience of growing up as a American Chinese Christian. So we decided to host this tea house discussion over this subject of being the challenges of being an American Chinese Christian. The bigger title is Under the White Shadow. Why do we call it Under the White Shadow? We'll explain it later. But yeah, let's start the tea house. And I'll let you guys introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Chris Javier. I'm an English ministry assistant at Chinese Christian Union Church located in Chicago's Chinatown. I was formerly a high school teacher. So I was teaching high school biology and a little bit of chemistry in Chicago public school system. So some high school before switching over to working full-time for the church.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Brandon?
I'm Brandon.
Yeah.
I'm a grad student. I'm also a small group leader at Chinese Christian Union Church. I grew up going to a multi-ethnic megachurch called Willow Creek. But
you grew up there?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
My name is Austin. I have a very Asian American job. I'm a software engineer at Amazon. And I also go to CCUC, but I grew up at a Chinese immigrant church in the suburbs of Chicago.
Yeah, recently we found out that his cousin brother was my best friend when I was in college. Yeah.
Small world.
Small world, what do you see?
I'm Daniel. I work as a furniture designer. And, I've been in Chicago my whole life. Grew up in CCUC. Yeah.
You grew up in CCUC?
Yeah, I grew up in
CCUC.
Ever since like preschool. I was in daycare there. I have photos.
All right. Yeah. My name is Shalom. And, most of you guys know me. I came into Chicago 15 years ago. I was born and raised in China until 18 years old. I went to Malaysia for hotel management school. Before I have 6 months to graduate, I quit and I came over, restarted my college at a Christian school, Bible major, and joined the seminary. Ended up here now. When I first came, I attended white people church for 7 years. Then I trying to search for a Chinese ministry. I left that church, eventually planted a Mandarin congregation in Bridgeport, and there's where we are. So I'm not, as you are, grew up here as an American Chinese Christian, but I kind of feel a lot of what you feel. And also I kind of have the different background and perspective as a Chinese. So why don't we start from your personal experience? One, something you appreciate and something you don't appreciate as a Chinese Christian here. Like when people raise you up, your parents raise you up. What do you appreciate?
I can go first.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a Chinese church in the suburbs, where we had a Chinese ministry, which was all Chinese speaking, and then we had the kids ministry, which was only English speaking, and we had virtually no interaction between the two because of the language barrier. But the one thing that did kind of make it through was a priority on spiritual discipline. I mean, I think it's very cultural in nature that discipline is good, but I think those things were always emphasized to, you know, read your Bible and to pray. And I think, even though it sounds like super cheesy, I think those things have borne a lot of fruit in my life.
That's something you appreciate.
I do appreciate that, yeah.
Okay.
I think something difficult was the hypocrisy of like what is ultimately important. I think when I grew up, I realized that like church was important only up to, like, Jesus and Christian things were important up to a point. Like as soon as it affected like my studies or if it affected my chance of getting into a good college, all of a sudden it wasn't important anymore. Like for example, my senior year, I didn't really want to go to church anymore, and then the only way I would convince my parents not to go to church is to tell them that I had to work on my college applications, and then they would let me sleep in on Sundays. So it was like that hypocrisy of like saying that, oh, God is the most important and we love him above all else, and then clearly seeing that there was something more important.
It feels like Christianity was an education tool for them to use in order to raise you to be a more successful man.
Yeah, like my Chinese school was at church. Like it was the parents who would teach me Chinese. So it was, and then we would like gather up after church and be sent to Chinese school where we would learn how to like do math and like play badminton. Like, you know, so it was like church was also a means to like further like Austin's educational attainment and all that. So
For you guys?
I could go. One thing I really appreciate was familiarity. I think I went to a, I think 98% Polish elementary or white elementary school, and growing up in church, it was always almost like a family, really. I think most of my parents' friends were introduced to me as like, they almost treated me as like their kid, and all the other kids at church, they felt more familiar to me than the friends I had at elementary school. And also just like being brought up through, you know, the daycare, the nursery, and the preschool programs. It just builds pretty strong relations with people you spend years and years with.
It was a real family to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a second family, yeah, for sure.
It is. You feel that is something you really appreciate after you grow up. You look back and it still confirms your identity in US.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think I didn't realize how special CCUC was in that aspect until I grew up. And I've visited other churches, some that were Asian American, some that weren't, but I think that was something that's very unique to CCUC. Yeah, I think something I didn't really appreciate so much had to do with how I think reserved Chinese people usually are if it's not within like a very comfortable setting, like a family setting. Even then, it's like pretty reserved in terms of the emotional side of things. And I always thought sitting in on services, Sunday services, and more of like the adult things as a kid, it felt like there's not a lot of emotion in what we were doing in terms of, you know, it's like praise and worship and things like that.
You feel it was too reserved.
Yeah, we're just like closed off, very business first kind of feeling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is a part of the culture.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, growing up, I never really talked with my parents, even at home, about much else besides like necessities in like you school and career, and those are the most important things to talk about, I think.
And there are things you want to talk about and was never being addressed fully.
I don't know if I wanted to particularly. I just noticed that the conversations I would have with my friends were very different from the ones I had with my parents and from my
even
counselors.
In the church, you don't talk about those things.
Yeah, rarely. It's mostly outside of the church.
What do you talk about in the church?
You know, memorizing Bible verses.
Okay.
This is all like before
Yeah.
I went into maybe high school and older. This is at first. But like, I think those moments were what really ingrained this feeling from the church to me. Of talking about rules and what is good and what is bad.
Yeah.
Instead of who each person is and who they are individually, like uniquely to the church. So.
Yeah.
No, I didn't grow up in the Chinese church, so I don't have as much of experience to share. I would say that I grew up in a mostly white neighborhood, and within the Asian students, there were like Koreans and Chinese, and I felt that because the Koreans had church, they had a community, and they knew each other, and they were friends with each other, and supported each other. I didn't feel as much of that sense of community with other Chinese Americans. I think a big part of that is because most Chinese people
don't go to church.
And so there's no community center for them to gather on. But that is actually something that I was encouraged to see when I came to CCUC, because they have like sports programs and stuff, and neighborhood kids will just like stop in to play volleyball, and then they'll go to start coming to church that way.
Yeah. Something you don't appreciate?
I'm not sure. I think I'm still pretty new to the Chinese church. So yeah.
Or something as a Chinese in the United States, when you were being raised, and there's something you don't like about.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I've noticed is I feel that a lot of people from other minority cultures, I feel that they support each other and and have like solidarity. Sometimes I do feel that like generally among Asian Americans, but specifically among Chinese Americans, I feel like I don't see it as much.
Okay. Huh. Yeah. You, sir? If you.
Yeah, I guess my positive, some of the things that I appreciate, similar to Daniel, I grew up at Chinese Christian Union Church, so in the nursery up till now I'm working here, so yeah, that's 37 years now.
Wow.
I'm gonna be 38 soon. So one of the things I really appreciate is I think there are many examples of people who are fully dedicated towards serving Jesus Christ. I've had so many, I guess, heroes of the faith, you could say, that have church is like a family, right? Similar to what Daniel was saying. And so I feel like if you go to a church and you pop in, you see a pastor, you just see them speak a message and they're gone, you can fake it. You can fake it in front of people, but in the Chinese church, it really is family. Everybody gets to know everybody deeply. And so I've seen people where you could see the sacrifice they have in front of everyone is nothing compared to the sacrifices that they make that nobody else sees. And that leaves I think a lasting impression and inspiration, and without them ever telling you do it this way, just being near to somebody who sacrifices like that, it feeds you and inspires you, but then it also helps you to prioritize in a certain way. So I've really, really appreciated that. Just the so many, and being in the church for almost 40 years now, I've seen generations of people who live that way, and it's great. So yeah, the longevity of the church just allows you to see example after example. And the same, I guess the flip side of that coin is that you see everybody. And so it makes it very, very hurtful when some of the people that you've seen growing up do something that you that was out of characteristic, you know, uncharacteristic that you never would have seen it coming. And sometimes those are the that kind of trauma, that kind of pain is the worst pain because you get blindsided by it. You know, for other people, maybe in other situations, you could kind of see a train wreck coming, but when it's from your family, that hurts a lot. And so, just in summary, it's the disunity that just seems to be rampant and so like emblematic of Chinese, and now I'm learning many Asian contexts it's that way. And so I think that's been the most heartbreaking thing is disunity.
Wow, thanks for being so honest with us. I feel that you it's not easy for you to see the flip side of it and share it with us. I really appreciate it. And I forgot to mention that we shouldn't really bring CCUC out so many times since 4 of you came from the same church. I mean, for the people who don't really know what CCUC is, it's Chinese Christian Union Church in Chicago, Chinatown. It's been there for over 100 years, 100-some years.
108 years.
108 years. It planted several locations in Chicago. It has 3 congregations, Mandarin, English, and Cantonese. And they raised generations of Chinese Christian in Chicago, very influential. You can't talk about Chinese church in Chicago without talking about CCUC. We just know so many people from CCUC. And I personally attended CCUC Mandarin congregation for 7 months, I feel like. And God called me to somewhere else. But really nothing against any church. It's we want to have a moment to reflect on the church environment that we grow up with or we are currently participating, and reflect on the situation of it and trying to see what is being super graceful, what is being super strengthful, and what is some area that we really need to work on, and the future generation will appreciate, and we are able to attend to their need more. So the reason I made it as under the white shadow was because I used to attend a Bible college and attend a white church, and I feel like a lot of Chinese people got into the church by that, like they want to be a part of the community, they want to be mainstream, and they even want to be Americanized, and their Americanized is the church life, is the traditional kind of church life, and they used to listen to a white pastor, and they used to follow a white theologian. They even kind of trying to live a lifestyle that designed by the white people in the US, until a moment that you realize that you are not white, and that is not saying that is not welcoming for you, but it's not really something biblical, and it's not something that really strengthens you as a person. Do you guys ever experience that you are not white, or you find the conflict of like leaving that part?
I think this is going to be related, but going back to the question about what do you talk about at church, and at my church growing up, all of our content in youth group was from the white evangelical church. We read famous books such as I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which everyone I'm certain loves. And we read like John Piper's books, Tim Keller's books, all like great stuff, but we didn't have, none of our content spoke to our experiences, none of our content related to like, okay, you're like experiencing this kind of treatment at school because you're Chinese. Like that's not in the book because Tim Keller didn't experience that growing up, you know, and that's like no fault of him, but yeah, I think a lot of our church, we just took what was from the American church and just pretended like we could just use it and it would be the same. But we are not exactly the same, you know? I think we are similar, especially in the suburban context. There are a lot of things that are similar. But yeah, like sometimes, you know, there are certain difficulties that you face that are because of your cultural experience, and those things were never addressed in those books. Because
I feel in some way it was like Moses when he was raised in Egypt, and eventually he found out that he's a Hebrew man, that he's not an Egyptian. And he caused it a crisis for him to see himself, that am I Egyptian, I am a Hebrew. He feels stuck and he ran away, that he's either. As a Chinese who came here when I was 23, I really had a strong heart of being a Chinese, and I had a strong mission of serving the Chinese people. Eventually go back to China and serve them. It gives me drive and gives me a strong identity as who I am. At some point, I feel like I cannot go back to China at that point, and I try my best to fit in to the local community, and eventually I feel I can't do that. I'm kind of wired to be different. I will never be American. And then, to me, the personal challenge is how do I create an identity, not totally submit to one culture, but submit to the kingdom of God and make me like a true sojourner on earth, and to explore why God lead me here, and what does He want me to do here. It kind of really guided me at this point. But what do you think when you grow up? Like,
yeah, I think that the perpetual foreigner myth is a common experience for many Asian Americans. It's the idea that Asian Americans are not fully American because they're not white. At the same time, many of us don't speak our native languages, so I can't really be Chinese either. And so I think the question for me is like, where do I belong? Like, where's my place, right? Because it feels like I don't really belong in any place. I think I'm encouraged when I read the Bible about Israel in Babylonian exile, because these people are separated from their homeland. Some of them probably don't even speak Hebrew, and like Jeremiah calls them to plant roots in the city that God has led them to. And so I feel in many ways that it parallels the Asian American experience of I'm not truly at home here in America or in this world, but I'm a citizen of a different kingdom. That's where I'm called to.
Yeah. You too?
I think my first experience with a non-Chinese church was when my family decided to actually go to Willow Creek for what feels like a few years. Or my sister's nodding, yes, a few years. And man, when I first went, were you in the Barrington? Did you go to the one?
I have gone, but that wasn't my
Okay. Well, the one in Barrington is like, I went, and the youth ministry there is huge, and the resources they have is immense. And to an Asian boy who was very limited in his childhood of like the pleasures of life, like video games and movies and stuff like that, that's like what they had in that youth ministry. And at first I thought it was amazing. It's like, this is heaven, right? But there's also small groups, and there's specifically a small group for people who are new to the church, people who don't have a small group yet. And over the few years, I always went to that newcomers small group, which is really strange to me thinking about it now, but I just never felt like I belonged. Right? And I didn't really understand it back then as a cultural difference or anything, but I just felt like I never connected with anyone else. Very similar to the way that I never really felt I connected exactly with people, my classmates growing up. And I actually like begged my parents to go back to CC. Like, why are we here? It's an hour and a half drive away from my house. Like, why aren't we back at CCUC? And it's interesting. I think on one hand, the familiarity of being with people you can call family kind of relaxes you, and so in some ways you can become complacent with your faith. But on the other side of the extreme, I think at Willow Creek I was so focused on my identity or like connecting with someone rather than seeing God. I feel like I couldn't see God at all in that place other than the words that we sing or some key phrases that the pastor would say. So that was kind of my first taste of that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting being at CCUC, we're completely removed from the white context.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess that's
even in the English congregation.
Even in the English congregation, I'm majority Chinese, and so for me, I'm half Chinese, half Filipino.
Oh, okay.
And my mom speaks. She's from Shanghai. Okay. And then she moved to Hong Kong when she was 6. So she speaks Shanghainese, Cantonese, and Mandarin.
Wow.
And my dad's Filipino, and he speaks Tagalog and Ilocano.
Ooh.
So 5 languages dialects between the two of them. And for me and my sisters, we learned none of it. So we got nothing. They gave us absolutely nothing. Okay. It was English only. And that was because I think my mom said she tried to teach us Chinese, but she tried to teach us later, as English was our first language. Yeah. And then we would just like give her a really hard time about it. We just didn't want to learn it. We would make fun of her. She said she was like, I'm not coming home from work to get bullied by my kids. So she abandoned all hope there. But but there was like a internal push towards assimilation in my family. So they wanted us to be American. Yeah. Right. So we were never going to go back to China or the Philippines. Like this was going to be it for us. Yeah. So as a result, I've felt home everywhere that I've gone. So I grew up in the white context, and I had to deal with racism very early. I remember like white classmates, Hispanic classmates, black classmates. Got it from all of them, and gave it right back. So I was just as racist as they were. That's what it was growing up. Even my group of friends, we looked like the Power Rangers. We had the diversity quotient like checked off. So we had all the different races in there, and we would throw racist names that I can't even repeat here, all at each other. That was just it. Like race was, we were aware of race, but it wasn't the dividing factor. It was just another way to mess with somebody, just as much as somebody's weight, to a kid growing up. And the interesting thing was, we could be throwing racist or jokes at our friend 1 minute, but if another person started saying things to, we're all standing together, looking different, but standing together in defense of a friend. So it's just very strange. But so
common enemy.
So I think race has been, I've been sheltered from the negative impacts of race. I've gotten to enjoy a lot of the benefits of it. So my school side, I didn't suffer from a ton of, outright like harassing racism. It was like friendly jokes. And then on the other side, God's given me this like cultural retreat where I can go among people that look just like me, and I can interact in a different way. And so I started to learn like the way that I developed like two personalities almost.
Wow.
Like who I was here at school, very different from who I was at church. And it wasn't just non-Christian versus Christian settings. It was like multicultural versus Chinese settings. And I think without anybody ever teaching you, you just kind of learn how to go with the flow and kind of code switch to succeed in both. So as a Christian, when you say like, you know, being under the white shadow, luckily I haven't felt that. But similar to Austin, a lot of the, like, my favorite preachers are all white.
You don't like Francis, okay?
I'm not a big fan. Yeah, so he looks like me, but I prefer, you know, I'd prefer Tim Keller or John Piper, John MacArthur even, you know.
They are good theologian, they are good preacher, and
yeah.
that's what we listen to, not their race, right? I mean,
yeah. So I guess even when I listen to them, and I've had no trauma to speak of.
Yeah.
So I think because of that, I can listen to them, and race never comes up until a discussion like this one, right? Even Francis Chan, like he looks like me, more like me than, you know, John Piper anyways. But that doesn't even register on my evaluation of whether I'm going to take from this person or not, or sit at the feet of another teacher. So I think I'm just very sheltered that way. They say like God gives, you know, the toughest battles to the strongest warriors, and I must be, I don't know, super weak that he's put these hedges around me so that I haven't felt any of that pressure.
Yeah. I think
I have a quick question. When you say like you don't really think about race, like, and thank you. Until like you have a discussion like this, and most of your favorite like preachers are white. Do you ever like sit on a sermon that's given by someone who's Asian, and you're like, whoa, this guy's good, and he's Asian? Because I feel like I also never really think about, oh, this guy's white. But whenever there's someone like me who's like, wow, this guy's really good, I think that sometimes surprises me, or that makes me feel like, whoa, never heard an Asian preach like that. Yeah,
I guess, so even coming from the CCUC side of things, most of the preachers that I listen to regularly look like me. So, this is YouTube Live right now? So hearing that kind of, hearing that preaching, I think I grew up, because it wasn't like an anomaly for me, that was the norm. So I grew up just evaluating the preaching. And I think I got so used to hearing regular speakers at CCUC that looked like me, that when I would go to a retreat and it was somebody else, we had Black, white pastors, Hispanic pastors, Indian pastors come through and preach to us. Still, it wasn't the race, it was just the teaching itself. And it was always past the teaching and like the presentation of the word. And so I guess I didn't have that, where I was like, I think if you flipped the scenario where I only saw white teaching, that was what I got growing up. And then this like awesome, you know, Chinese pastor comes through and just gives a real faithful and powerful transfer of the text. I think that maybe that could have done it, but just the situation that God put me in, I still see right through it. And yeah, I think it's because I had so much of that. I guess I haven't realized.
I must agree with him in this level, because Christianity isn't a traditional thing to the Chinese community, and especially as immigrant, we are kind of young with it, and theology doesn't grow in one night, and the pastor doesn't train in one day, and it's a generation of generations Christian heritage, and their treasures that passed down, spiritual treasures that heritage passed down to this generation. And you, as an English speaker in US, you have a variety of sources you're gonna choose for your own spiritual life. And if you really compare the quality, there are a lot of better and more polished, more developed theologians which are there. And the Chinese are still young and learning, not that profound or not that influential. That is kind of the reality we are working with. Meanwhile, that my personal experience of finally being really noticed of not only being white is like you are not American was because of one pastoral meeting that I attended as we speak, that we are streaming on YouTube just to put some kind of good faith to the table, that there was one embarrassing meeting I attended of challenged by a senior pastor in the church I worked with, and being told me that the Mandarin congregation took advantage from the English, and he used a metaphor to describe this relationship, which is sexually offensive, culturally offensive to me. I would not even repeat on a YouTube stream, and that really shocked me. That what were you saying? Like, please repeat your statement because my English is not good enough to process what you said.
This is a China?
No, this is American church leadership team, and I just want him to repeat what he said for me to really take it without misunderstanding, and that is what he meant. And at that point, I start to notice at the core of this ministration, there's a primary culture. There's a secular culture in the church organization that everybody has have a seat, everybody have a voice, and everybody treated equally, which is the culture. I always believe that this is the church culture. And at some point, I start to notice they have a different culture function inside of their core, which doesn't really include the minority at that point. And they don't even, I think they don't intend to say evil things, but the language system is something they used to, and is something that they feel is okay. And when they say it out, it really broke the peace, broke the unity between us. I didn't know where was I, what was I doing, why am I in that meeting. As a Chinese immigrant, as a seminary student, as a young minister, we've been told that you may want to stay away from the Chinese church because they don't have a healthy culture. And that kind of really pushed me to a direction to pursue pastoral position in a American church setting. Even with the Mandarin congregation, we're trying to fit into a different culture and a management system, different church culture. And eventually, personally, my conclusion is there's no perfect culture. There may be a lot of problem inside of Chinese church system. There may be a lot of limitation of church faith community, Chinese faith community, but there's no church community without problem, without cultural problem. I made my peace with them. I think they are who they are. It's their limitation. It's not their being racist or they trying to push me away. It's the limitation of them. They grew up with the white people. They grew up with that language system. As you said, that is a natural thing for people who grew up in a different ethnic community. And they only used to work with the white folks, and that's it. So to me, I think what we really want to develop is how do we build a healthier church culture, and how the Chinese church in the future can be more culturally aware or strong in some way to support the Asian to be Chinese Christian and to address their actual need, to address their identity crisis or vision for their life. How does the Chinese church able to respond to that? And how do we make peace with another tradition or community? That's the topic. What do you want from your church, regard of these?
I think the biggest disconnect. So my Mandarin is a work in progress, right? Growing up, I hated Chinese school, but when I turned, or actually just a few years ago, I was overseas. I was in Turkey, and we were doing an accountability meeting, me and this missionary. And one of the questions was, "What is your relationship with your parents like?" And I never even considered that this is like a faith issue, right? And I told them that it's super shallow because my Chinese sucks. And he says like, "Do you think that's okay?" And I was like, I never considered that it would not be okay, you know? So I decided to learn Chinese. And then I found out my grandma had cancer. She only speaks Chinese. If you've seen the movie The Farewell, I had like a farewell moment where I was like, I need to learn Mandarin. So I started learning Mandarin. And then I went to the Chinese side of my church for the first time. And things started, I saw their spirituality for the very first time. I've grown up in this church for like over 10 years, and I had never seen them do Jesus things, you know? I never understood what they were saying when they were preaching from the Bible. I had no idea what they were saying. When they were praying, no clue what they were praying about, you know? I had no idea. Like, they were effectively not Christian from my perspective because I had no idea what they were saying. And and there was such like I just felt connected once I understood, you know? Or at least I felt like it was such a strange experience. I was like, I felt like my eyes were open. I was like, oh, they're really Christian too, you know? And I think that's actually a very common experience between congregations of different languages. It's like, we don't even realize that they really do love Jesus too, because we have no idea what they're saying, you know? And that is, I think that's like a challenge that's just inherently built into the Chinese church, because you're just gonna be multilingual, and there are very few people who can truly cross that language barrier with ease. But, and I would say most, or not most, but a lot of church conflict is born from this fundamental issue of the language barrier. You know, I can't even count the number of times I've heard, like, even in like Korean churches, like the KM and the EM, or the, you know, Mandarin speaking congregation or the Cantonese congregation versus the English ministry, you know, having issues, you know, because they cannot resolve them due to these barriers. And I just wish that we would be able to overcome those barriers. And I feel like that would be such a testament to God's, you know, unifying power.
It's like
but it feels like a dream that can
Tower of Babel inside of the church.
Yeah, Tower of Babel inside the church.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to hear what you're gonna say. Like, you seems like particularly interested in the tea house and what I do. What do you want to get from it if all the resources open to you, and what do you want to get from it?
From the tea house?
From whatever like this place is offering.
It's a good question. I think that someone who grew up in like an American context, as I talked about before, like I feel disconnected from Chinese culture sometimes, and so appreciate that I can come here to what at least I perceive to be like an authentic Chinese tea experience, and learn more about culture. My Mandarin's not very good, but I like listening to you because it helps me practice. And I really appreciate the ministry that this is, and your heart for the international students. I think that's really important. So I think it's all those things that I appreciate about the tea house.
Yeah. Do you vision in the future you can be the person who do ministry in these setups and to minister to the students as somebody who grew up here?
I'm not sure. I haven't considered it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think to me it's a little bit awkward to run a business. That this business is not primarily focusing on the business side. Is not primarily focusing on the Chinese, because there are too many bubble tea shops and bad competition. I just don't really focus on the Chinese, and we want to teach the Americans to drink tea. But ministry-wise, we are very much focused on the Chinese international student to give them a safe space and somewhere they can be a little bit more secure and proud of to be as a Chinese. And the meanwhile, it created this fake identity in between that we are connecting both non-Chinese and the Chinese. I think the mission is how do we convert things to be a new culture, that based on something Chinese but open to all people, to all cultures, and make gospel known to the Chinese, but also has a Chinese perspective of the gospel. I think, as we talked before, there's no good Chinese theologian or pastor at this point we can look up to. And it leaves the quest to us that are we really working on that direction to be a better Chinese theologian or pastor? How that better gonna come out from? Do we only learn what's the traditional there, or do we try to develop something ourselves? That's the quest. And what do you guys think? How do you be a better Chinese pastor? How do you be a better Chinese theologian?
So something I've noticed is that Koreans have been extremely successful in this manner. The president of the Gospel Coalition is Korean. Mm-hmm. The president of Westminster Theological Seminary in California is Korean.
Really?
You know,
I didn't know that.
And Koreans have truly are vastly overrepresented in a sense compared to like the Chinese American Christian. I would say part of it is because Korea is a predominantly Christian nation, so they do have some kind of Christian infrastructure in Korea, while in China everything's underground or it has to be outside of China, right? But yeah, it's I think it's possible. I think CCUC is in a unique position because it is very different from the rest of the Chinese churches in Chicagoland. It does have a history.
It is.
It does have, generations of Christians, and there is wisdom that has been built up over the years that a church like mine growing up does not have any of, so, like relatively speaking,
Don't mention that church's name. Yeah.
It's just very, very different. So I think we do have a unique opportunity. But I think because Chinese Americans, we are so fixated through our parents on our careers, very few of us even consider full-time ministry, even in the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
Like how many Chinese American pastors do you know? So few. Shockingly few. Because
Especially,
we're all engineers.
Yeah.
You know? And then later we go to seminary, maybe, you know? And then God
we
calls us
retire.
out.
We retire.
Something like that, right? There's very few Chris's in this world. You know? Not many. And he was a teacher for a long time before this too, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the number of homegrown, you know, ministers is so low. It's just not a viable path.
As you said, I do believe is a value problem that still a lot of Chinese church take their faith as a tool to educate their children, to train their children. It's not something they devote themselves to, but something they want to take advantage of.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like, I remember like my wife, her parents sent her to CC. They're not Christian because they thought that it was a good place for their kids to learn like how to play nice with others, you know, and it's safe and all the kids like it's just a good environment, you know. It's basically childcare. It's daycare, you know. And it's free. So which is amazing, you know? Like, well, why would you not? You know? Yeah. But because of that, like, there's also very few people who would want to do that as their full-time job.
Yeah.
You know?
How do you be a better Chinese pastor or theologian?
I am searching for that answer right now. I'm in seminary. I'm at Moody, and then been paying attention to a lot of how our church is pastored for the past 40 years. I think the answer that I'm coming to now that I'm moving into positions of leadership is that even though I grew up in the church, there has to be a dedication and devotion to still learning the church. So even learning like what it's like to be in this new position in the church. But before I was called to be on the pastoral staff, I was on our deacon board, our elder board. And that was an experience because that was me meeting with people from different congregations who you just brush shoulders by. You know their name, but you never have a full conversation. And learned so much about how different we are. We're occupying the same buildings, but we're so very different. So even in that one meeting, all in English, one language, but different cultural approaches to answering questions and different cultural approaches to how we proceed to get work done. And then different cultural approaches to how we deal with conflict as we serve. And what I'm learning now is that if I'm going to be, I think for anyone to be effective in at least our cultural setting, you have to have your mind towards, if you're not intentionally inclined towards unity, then you will find ways to start to hate your brother.
Yeah.
And I think that's just what happens because Austin and I were talking before we started this, just on some of the many barriers that we have that other churches don't, right? So Austin was bringing up that where other churches, there is a generational gap. There's one generation is different from the next, and how do you navigate that? But in our context, we still have that issue, but across cultural and language barriers as well. And those different cultural and language barriers make the generational gap difficult to bridge, but there's like 3 different generational gaps across the 3 different cultures, right? So it's difficult, but what I have also seen is that when you're inclined towards peace and like learning and hoping for the best from the things that they're saying, then it saves you. You know, it saves you. So I've got specific examples where we've been heading towards a crisis where one congregation is upset at another congregation's leadership at how we do things, and one congregation is accusing another congregation of doing something a certain way, and for there to be a peacemaker to say, like, wait, like everybody, just like pump the brakes, let's pause, and let me talk to this congregation and see what their stance on this is, and then let me talk to my brothers in this congregation and get more information. In my 3 years on leadership, what I saw was often when you took that extra step of getting that extra information, you find out that, there was critical info that was needed to make a good judgment on this that we didn't have, and because we didn't have that, we were actually fighting about a non-issue. So I think that's what's really needed in our Chinese context, is knowing that there are these barriers. So first being aware of them, and then being inclined towards the peace, where it's like we need to fight, almost fight for peace.
Yeah.
And we need to be ready to like really dive in towards one another.
Yeah.
One thing that we've been doing at all of our pastoral staff meetings, anytime we get a chance to pray, there are a number of us who do this now, I've noticed, is that we just explicitly pray for peace. And it's a praying for peace on the pastoral leadership team, knowing that we have the responsibility where if we don't have peace here among the pastors and the deacons, then how can we expect there to be peace from the congregations we're leading?
This is actually what I still appreciate for American, even it's white, the heritage or tradition, the English congregation, or your heritage of doing the church, set it up to do it. Like you pray for peace consistently. I think most of Chinese church don't do that. Yeah, let's pray for prosperity and self-development, and I don't care about anything else. Yeah.
It's become a heart of our prayers, knowing that if we don't, then our natural state, default state, is towards away from each other. But it's interesting too. So that's already one barrier that we have in terms of just learning the church, and I think if you're not dedicated to being a student and listening and learning, then you won't pastor well. As an English or Cantonese Mandarin, or even as a senior pastor, can you listen to the different congregations and what their needs are and things like that?
I think in regard of Chinese church, I really pray the church can love their own people more. Not in a way to only provide service or free daycare. That is a way to show love, but I think you need to love your people, your culture, your history more in order to serve better. There's urgency for the new immigrants to get rid of the Chinese-ness of them and to be white, to be American. But I don't think that is God's heart for the Christians. And I always remember 500 years ago when Jesus missionary went to China, Li Ma Dou, and he did a lot of translation work. But in a book he wrote, The True Meaning of the Lord of Heaven, he shared his devotional life in that book, that every day he wakes up, pray for the Chinese people for 20 years. He prayed for the Chinese people's salvation. He dared to pray for that and to ask God to help him do the translation and share the gospel to the Chinese. He wrote it in classic Chinese, decent classic Chinese, like poetry. And when I read that, I just feel shocked and ashamed at some point that I don't have that love he had. And I don't love my own people like he loved my people. And if I don't do this, who's gonna do it? I was counting on the American missionaries to do the work myself, and that is why they are better theologians. That is why they are better pastors, because they love the Lord more than we do. They serve our people better than we do, and that's why they are better. I mean, if you don't really have this burden, you're never gonna be good at it. If you really don't love these people deep enough. Yeah, and I just think that we should, to speak for the future, the ministry have a lot of room to grow. how do we form the ministry differently? If there are few things we can work on to make the ministry being transformed to the new era of a ministry, that what do you want to do? There's a few things you can change and you think this will work for the church. What do you want to do? Not necessarily with CCUC, just so to speak, take off the pressure.
Sorry, can I ask who is that author? What was that author's name?
Li Ma Dou. I don't know his.
Matteo Ricci.
Matteo Ricci. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
If you can make a few change and boost the ministry or make it healthier, better, what would you do?
I have some thoughts on that.
Yep.
So you said you felt this deep shame, you
Mhm.
know, because you're encountering this theologian or minister or missionary 500 years ago. I experienced something similar in 2020 when the pandemic hit. Our church shut down, as did a lot of churches did, and I was on the deacon board, and we were meeting. To just discuss what to do with the church. Meanwhile, while we were so concerned about how things were happening here, a sister in Christ from East Asia, she knew it hit them before it hit us. The pandemic hit them before it hit us. So she knew that it was going to impact us. She raised $10,000. They purchased masks. They knew there was going to be a shortage, so they sent some. And when I heard that, just deep shame and conviction, not just shame. We didn't leave it there, but it was deep conviction because somebody who was halfway across the world, a world away, loved our community better than we did. Now, in hindsight, she had a head start. Right, so we were still figuring things out. They had some things figured out. But I think some of the leaders took that to heart, and we said, when this comes here, and we don't know how bad it's going to get, nobody should love Chinatown better than the Chinese church in Chinatown. And if anybody does it better than us, then we've messed up, because I think God really used that to clarify our identity, at least in the minds of a lot of our leadership, that we are God's church in Chinatown. We are God's church in Chicago's Chinatown. And when we claim that, it just opens up the doors and points very clearly that we need to go out there, we need to understand the needs, learn the needs, find out what's being done to meet those needs, and then any gaps, the church needs to go fill those in. And so that's what we've undertaken to do. And what we've been learning the past couple of years is that when we start to take those efforts out into the community, same thing, if we're to be a better pastor, I think we got to listen and learn. I think to be a better church, we have to listen and learn in our community. And what I've been seeing is that when we do what God has called us to do, when we live like an Acts church, like the church in Acts, when we're doing church outside of the four walls, it actually unifies us. That itself is unifying. Just following the steps that God has laid out. It's like we're all on these different paths for most of our Christian, church congregational lives. And yet when we take the steps that He's leading us out into the community, they're steps that are leading us this way, so that we're walking side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And a lot of the ministries that we've been doing, going into the neighborhood, we're now going into the neighborhood, knocking on doors, and I'm knocking on doors to meet our neighbors with people who are in their 70s and 80s. Cantonese speakers. We would have never hung out. It just wasn't in the cards. We're not interested in the same things. But we both love Jesus, and we are both called to go share that love of Jesus with our neighbors. And there we are on a Sunday afternoon. And it's a beautiful thing.
Community involvement.
Yes, it's the community, it's the fellowship, and it's not a popular word, but it's obedience together. And that's very unifying.
I mean, as you said, I think a lot of Chinese are still conservative. They don't really express their feeling out well enough. That need to change, right? Yeah, start with
I don't know. I think being really honest, I came to this discussion more from a wanting to learn. I think this topic of just under the white shadow is something I never really thought about at all. And this morning we had a seminar on designing our life and kind of like outline the process of solving problems. And before empathizing with the problem, you have to accept the problem. And I think I'm literally at that first step of accepting that this disconnect of Christianity with Chinese culture as a problem. Because I think growing up, the things that I saw as shortcomings in growing up in a Chinese family and in a Chinese church, it made me feel like I want to get away from Chinese culture. Like, Chinese culture is the problem that, and so I really want to get away from that. And now, even sitting here and being, I don't know, it just gives me that feeling of the family that I grew up with when I was at CCC as a kid, and that part kind of sparks it shows that I still have some type of love or feeling for that side of my identity, and I'm still, I'm definitely learning. I like what Chris said. A lot of good points that I've never thought about, but
I think we as a culture, this didn't come up in one of your sermons before, or it was maybe someone else, but I think we really like, when the Bible teaches like honor your mother and father, but we don't like let the dead bury the dead, or we don't like maybe sell everything you have and follow me, right? And as we think about like the next generation of Chinese leaders, like Austin said, we need people who are, I think, who are radically committed to the church in ways that defy the expectations of traditional Chinese culture.
Deeper cultural reconstruction, redesign the Chinese culture through Christ.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, redeem the Chinese culture through Christ.
Yeah, I think, okay, I have to go after this, but just to show how disconnected we are from our culture, I'm going to do a little experiment with the 4 Asian Americans here. Who here knows their dad's name?
Oh, for me it would be my mom's dad, yeah.
You know his name?
I know my dad's dad, on the Filipino side.
You don't know your mom's dad's name. Do you know your dad's name?
Oh, I do.
You do? Do you?
Yeah.
That's cheating. That's cheating. No, yeah is cheating. You know his actual name.
No.
You don't know his actual name. I don't know his actual name either.
Okay.
We're 3 out of 4. We don't know our grandparents' names. Isn't that wild? I think that illustrates just how ridiculously disconnected we are. We don't even know our family members' names. Their actual names.
What's the disconnect?
We don't know. You don't know your family's name? Like, that's wild, right? Like, no American.
It's traditional in Chinese culture to refer to your family members.
Yeah, but you guys all know your grandparents' names, no?
I don't know.
Really?
What?
I know my grandma's name, but just 爷爷.
You don't know your yes name?
He passed away before I was born.
Oh,
Okay, that's different. I know my yeye's still alive. I can ask him tomorrow.
You do that.
But yeah.
But I think they didn't tell you that. They didn't
Of
tell
course
you.
they didn't tell me that. What?
It's a secret identity. It's like for teachers, we don't tell them our first name. It's
Exactly. They're just always right?
Wow.
Yeah. We're so disconnected, right? And oftentimes, I never asked my parents what my grandpa's name was. I didn't care. I think growing up, as Daniel said, I identified Chinese culture as the problem for a lot of my life. Like big gripes that people have with Chinese culture. Okay, they don't believe that mental health Israel, right? Big right. Number two, they're so success oriented, right? Number three, I don't know, like we're all men here, but a lot of Chinese women have a lot of gripes with how Chinese women are treated in Chinese culture.
Yeah.
I always identified Chinese culture as the problem.
Yeah.
And because of that, my disconnect just continued to grow from me to the Mandarin congregation of my church.
Wow.
And
Was that explicit or implicit? Was that like, were there voices that were saying these things to you?
no, I would just look and I would see, like, it's always the Chinese congregation that is the problem. They're toxic, they're whatever, I think that was my, experience. Or Chinese parents are toxic. Chinese parents, all they do is gossip about where their kids get into college. All they do is, push their kids to study hard, but they don't realize they have depression, something like this. These are super common complaints in the circles that I grew up, and because of that, I'm so disconnected from being Chinese, and I hope moving forward that is not the case, because there is something special about being Chinese that I don't want to abandon,
Yeah, it's kind of challenging to not only make peace with the Chinese culture or Chinese-ness of our community, our family, ourselves, but actually to find out what is actually positive and what actually good in the eyes of God inside of the Chinese culture.
Yes.
We always say Chinese culture, but what is Chinese culture? Success-driven is not necessarily a Chinese culture. It's a modern society's idealism, sickness of being.
Playing all songs.
Oh no, thanks. Yeah, and how do you actually find something? 把那个关了. Find something positive enough that you can proudly say that as a Chinese, these are the things I'm really wanting to share with you. I think it's beneficial to everybody and it's universal. And the grace of God can use this as a vessel, and I can bless others. As a Chinese pastor in the U.S., the reason we do tea house and we also have an original music band and all the stuff is because the Christianity never had a good engagement with the Chinese culture. None in history. That nothing left that as a good experiment that both sides will recognize if this is Christian enough and Chinese enough. We want to keep it around and keep practicing it. None.
Not even the true meaning of the Lord of Heaven.
It was a debate. It didn't really continue bear much fruit for the Catholicism's future development in China. I mean, it's still in the process. I'm not saying that and possibly it's part of the fruit, but I'm saying that we are lack of good results. We are good models. I believe it is the American Chinese calling to continue keep that happening and keep experimenting a good ministry model, a cultural model, merging Christianity with Chinese culture. To think about I would challenge four of you to think about one good gospel song not translated from English language.
Like a Chinese
Chinese
song?
Yeah, worship song.
Do we know any Chinese worship songs? I know like two. I know like 深深爱你. That's all I know.
神说爱你. 神仙爱你. No, that is translated from English.
That's translated too? I got nothing then.
There's none. So I think we need to put our own faith to practice and to create, like the Israelites outside of Egypt. God gave the commandment to write a song to remember the salvation work He did on them. I think it is our responsibility to create a new work, to to make the offering of our own culture for God to use and transform a culture. If the American Chinese don't do that, I don't see anybody else who's going to do a better job. Like you said, CCUC is in Chinatown. If that church doesn't love Chinatown better, it's a failure. And if we don't do the thing we should do, it's a failure. Even we became American, even we became good theologian preacher, it's a failure because we didn't really take the task God given to us and resource us to do.
So I'm thinking.
Any last word, and he needs to go.
Oh,
so
sorry.
yeah,
No, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Oh,
No.
okay. I'm thinking back to what you had said earlier about the theological treasures that are passed down through the generations. I think that's something I never considered, and that there are so many other cultures and traditions that have centuries built up, and just what that impact might be.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think there was a point in my growth where I felt the same way that you guys felt. That Chinese culture was the problem. And I think the more I started to see other churches, so I would go to a Catholic church with my cousins, the Filipino side, big Catholics. And then I visited some black churches, visited some Hispanic churches out on the northwest side where I was teaching, different Korean churches and campus ministries. And then at UIC, all of these different churches. What I started to notice was like, the grass wasn't always greener. And there were some things that I appreciated, you know, like the different types of worship, the different types of like preaching styles and all that stuff. But seeing all of it also made me start to appreciate more some of the things that were happening at home.
Yeah.
I'm preaching now. When I preach at CCUC, I'm not trashing my own church, okay? So, but when I preach there, very little reaction in the crowd. All right, so I might.
Problem.
Yeah, it's like, no, you guys keep doing what you're doing, because here's the thing: when I'm sitting in there, I give very little reaction. I don't interact with the preacher.
Let me give you some comfort. If they don't fall asleep, I'm doing a good job.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Even if they're asleep, I'm like, God's speaking to you in those dreams. Hopefully, as the words. But I, you know, we're not super like emotive. I don't have a ton of people saying amen. And when I preached at other churches, I've had that where people are answering back and all these different things. And I think it could be easier for a preacher to be like, well, I want to go where I'm getting the amens. My amen count at this church is sky high. You know, my career amen count here is 0. But the difference is that I sat in those pews. And so I know some of the deepest messages that have hit me, and the deepest words that God has spoken through a preacher, it wasn't met through an amen for me, but just a quiet resolution that, God, I'm going to love you better by making this change. Or God, I'm so grateful because I understand just how deeply I'm forgiven. And I didn't say anything, I didn't do anything, but that's how I was. And I started to appreciate more that like we've got people who are sitting there taking notes, and then even if I didn't hear them react to it, and yet I'm seeing them respond to it.
Yeah.
Right? We've got new small group leaders. We have new people going on missions. We have this, like God's moving people and in different ways in our church. And so I think what I've started to appreciate was this fact that I think any church you go to, they're going to have their strengths, they're going to have their weaknesses. And for me, it now all comes down to calling.
Yeah.
Right? So some people are called to go. Like just the experiences you've had, the way that God wants you to go be part of a multicultural church. God wants you to go be part of an American church, stick it out at a Willow Creek, and start to make a way for space for Asian Americans in Willow Creek, if that's the calling. But if the calling is to sit in the pocket in a Chinese church and go through all the good and bad of it, then I think if you're dedicated to that calling, God can use you to bring light into some of the weaknesses, but God can use some of the great things of the church to grow you in ways that maybe you weren't looking for. So I've had this kind of like, maybe it's a chip on my shoulder that, and a clear calling that I only want to serve at Chinese Christian Union Church. I'm not going to apply anywhere else. Because if it's not at Chinese Christian Union Church, I could go back to teaching if that's not it. You know what I mean? I was doing fine there. But I think the calling has been clear that the problems of the church aren't like a hurdle to be avoided. They are the ministry. Like
even the problem.
Yes, those problems are the ministry. Like we're here for that. So some of us are brought into, like, we talk about a 108-year-old church, the history of it, right? It's amazing. But 40 years, I've been there 40 years. You know, like, people have history at these churches.
Yeah.
That means something.
Yeah.
There are things that you can learn that some of my brothers and sisters in Christ who've gone to other churches and have spent time in all these different contexts, and they still continue to go to different contexts, they know that I'll never know because they've gone and seen things that I haven't seen. But there are things that I've seen staying in that place and enduring that cannot be easily transferred to somebody who just comes back. You can't just tell them. It's something that has to be felt, experienced, lived through, and then it transforms you. So it comes down to the calling. And so if that's the calling, I think it's to go. And then last thing is, you brought up this great concept of it's got to be, we have to transform Chinese culture. What did you say? To redeem Chinese culture?
Yeah, restructure Chinese culture through Christ, or redeem the Chinese culture through Christ.
Yes.
Redeem, because it's based on the 5 model of Christ and culture. The last one is redeem culture through Christ. Yeah.
So
how
what?
do you redeem a culture?
Like,
how is it wrong? How is the culture? It's like how people interpret culture, how they act is wrong.
How, isn't culture something formed naturally? Like, how can you manipulate that?
I would say every
You guys gotta pull up a chair.
I would say every human culture overemphasizes and underemphasizes aspects of what God views as good, right? Very few cultures truly prioritize just bad things, you know, right? Like, you know, some cultures value, like, you know, like not shame, but like an honor-shame related relationship, you know, and you see that expressed in the Bible. But I would say most cultures are out of balance than what God has in balance, you know. Like an overemphasis on achievement, or overemphasizing on honoring your parents without any understanding of sacrifice, you know. Sacrificing even your familial ties, you know, whatever it may be. I would say every culture is not fully in tune with God's perspective. All culture is fallen because all man is fallen, right? And we want to take what is good and keep it, and then look to what is bad and improve it, right? Because that's just what we got. That's our base. That's what we're starting at, is the culture, you know. And if you ignore that, it'll be hard to diagnose problems, and it'll be hard to identify strengths, right? That's my perspective. I really need to go now. But I'll really head out.
I'll see you later.
Yeah,
See you later,
I'll see
my
you.
man.
I'll see you.
Yeah.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah. Next time.
Yeah.
I'm always here, so
We'll see you soon.
we'll finish wrapping it up after you.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think when you brought up not only, like, I guess, redeeming Chinese culture, but you said there are, like, so many great things about our culture too.
Yeah.
That we need to like share.
Yeah.
And preserve.
Yeah.
And cultivate, right?
Yeah.
So in that regard, Chicago's a city of neighborhoods, and it's a city of so many different, like, cultural enclaves where they're just silos almost. We've got Chinatown over here. There was Ukrainian village just to the east is Bronzeville. Then you've got Bridgeport. All these different cultural pockets. And what I'm seeing is that other churches are light years ahead of us on even defining what their culture is.
Yeah.
Like, they know what it is. It's something they can firmly grasp, and then they can take pride in it, and they can speak.
Yeah.
Right. They're preaching traditions. They're serving traditions. They're worship traditions. Those are things that are very well established and defined, and then they just run with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the Chinese church, that's not defined.
Mm.
And now it's almost like clicked a light on when you talked about the centuries of a head start that other cultures have had. So it makes sense instead of just being mad at Chinese culture for where we're at. But what I'm seeing too is that those other cultures, they're starting to collaborate more. They're sharing with one another, and if you look at all these like videos or pictures of these events, it's black, it's white, it's Hispanic. And then there's one Asian guy, always, and they always put that Asian guy on the cover.
Yeah.
So the Asians are missing from the conversation. And I'm thinking, as I'm going to learn in like black neighborhoods from how they deal with community issues, how do they approach it? Then I'm going to Hispanic neighborhoods, learning from that. What I'm doing is I'm sitting back and I'm watching these panels, and I'm thinking to myself, like, the Chinese culture, we can have one of these too. Because there's a way that we approach cultural issues or community issues too. And there's expertise that we've developed, over 100 years of being here. Chicago's the most successful Chinatown in the nation, right?
Yes.
And now we've got our own ward, and so in politics we're starting to grow. So, but then you look within the church, and I think we are behind that.
Yeah.
We're like a step behind on saying, I don't know if it's like a cultural thing where we just want to be humble, and so we just keep our head down and we have nothing to contribute. And I think everybody loses out when we do that, when we just, diminish ourselves, because we need to display what God has put on our hearts and given for us as a calling, a specific calling for us that's not anybody else's. So we can speak out of expertise, and that's a blessing to other cultures, just as we're being blessed by them.
Yeah, I think we will continue work on it, and we should just be ministry partners for a good run, and we can do something together. But I think it's a complicated situation. In general, my personal conclusion would be a lot of Chinese don't have the cultural confidence being a Chinese. They were not really trained to be a good philosopher or artist. They are after Cultural Revolution generations that are being wiped away by the party, that they don't really know much about their heritage. They are Chinese. They know they have 1,000 years history, and they don't really have much heritage. Something they can benefit themselves. This is a part of it, and also that politically the Chinese culture now being seen as something anti-American culture in China. That they're trying to push a propaganda against the U.S. Politically. So it makes us kind of distant from a universal value in some way as Chinese. I think Christianity help us to be a part of the bigger culture zone, and to give us a better tool to understand what the universal value is and how do we participate in that.
What the universal value is.
Yeah, when we stop the YouTube streaming, I will talk to you. And I think by doing that, eventually something like Tea House and something more inviting for other people to be a part of, we will find the pace, we will find our angle and our voice in the process, not by taking over other people's right of speaking, not by only complaining about not being given enough, but gracefully stand up as who we are and use whatever God give us to take care of our own people and to take care of others, bless others. So it's a long-term task, and it can start today. It can start tomorrow. Better today than tomorrow.
Yeah. Amen.
Thank you for participating. It's a good round of discussion. We don't normally have topics in English, but this is our kind of try out now with the Brandon and Austin and you. I think we should